Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to this week's episode of SICW Championship Wrestling. As you know, we come to you each and every Sunday evening at 8 p.m., and we talk about the past, the present, and the future, and we show you all the great actions and take you back in time of some of the classic matches from Wrestling at the Chase or wherever they may come from. And we always have special guests come in with us, and I'm excited tonight. Not only is he an author, he's a producer, but he's a good friend, and I speak other than my good friend Ed Wheatley. Ed, thanks for being in the studio.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming in, and I thought it'd be good to come in and kind of bring the fans kind of update on what's going on in the life of Ed Wheatley after such, how long's it been now since the book came out?
It came out in 2022, so I mean it's
and still people are
still demand all around the region, people wanting to come hear talks. But more importantly, I think it's people wanting to come and tell their stories because, as I said in the book and the film we had on PBS, which is continuing to be showed, and it's going to be shown this spring again on PBS. And I wrote in there 4 words, change a person. All I have to do is say, wrestling at the Chase, and immediately a smile, big eyes come up, and you can see they want to tell you something. I mean, you'll be out at events, people want to, tell you their memories. You'll be at the grocery store or out at dinner, and people will come over and, hey, I want to, and it's funny, how many of them, just last night I was doing an event on sports and things, this film we're working on, and a guy was telling me about it. I remember going over to my grandma's house. Everybody has a grandmother story tied to wrestling at the Chase, and you'll see many of them in our book and our films. But it's just really a click. Not only is it a click to the sport, it's a click to that family relationship, that special memories, not of just a show, but I was with my grandparents at their house, and when you start thinking about that, you think of the smells, whatever she was cooking all the time and that. And,
right. And for those of you who maybe you're just tuning in for the first time tonight, what we're talking about is Wrestling at the Chase, this beautiful coffee table book. And I remember our good friend Jim Carnett saying when he got his copy of it, he said, I just laid across the bed with it. He said the pages were so crisp and it smelled so great. And this is a well put together book, both production-wise and the quality of it. And it's filled of just photos after photos and stories of who made St. Louis wrestling great, starting with the late, great Sam Muchnick, as you well know.
Right, and you just turn it over a minute, and immediately people resonate. I remember them. And when I do books, and for what we have, won a lot of awards and led to Emmy-nominated films on Wrestling at the Chase, it's load them with pictures. And I'll do 500 to 750 pictures per book. And as I go into, a lot of schools have me come talk throughout the region. I do about 4,000 students a school year on how to write well, using some of my books as patterns because sports is a thing they can engage in. So I have a couple other books that are like more children-oriented books. And, I always tell them, I load them with pictures. We've won a lot of awards. His best book published this year and that year on this different topic of sports. But those pictures, they tell 1,000 words. You don't have to write all this stuff because all of a sudden they know what you're going to be writing. It accents what you write. And that's people, they get into those pictures. And especially at Wrestling at the Chase when we have the scene photos from the Coruscant room or in the when they move to the studio. People looking to find themselves or people they know in the audience.
Well, and that's the thing that's been really interesting with this book. And when I first got to meet Ed and he pitched the idea to me, I thought, people are looking for this. Larry Matisek always wanted to do a coffee table book like this, made full of pictures. And of course, Ed come along and he put it together. And he's right. Everywhere I go, I still hear those 4 words, Wrestling at the Chase. Of course, that's what we do here at SICW. We build on that foundation that Sam Muchnick and Larry Matisek and all those before left us. And this is just another way. And Ed, real quick, when you started this project, did you ever think that I know you knew it was popular in St. Louis,
Yeah.
but did you ever in your wildest days realize the response it was going to get from these stories that you've been hearing people tell?
No, I mean, it's one of those things, I've written a lot on baseball. And baseball is so popular in St. Louis, long history of the Cardinals and the Browns. And this was a niche type thing, or so they say, or my publisher would say. And it's got, and I say it's a generational thing, because you got to remember when Sam Muchnick, got into the NWA in 1949, and Wrestling at the Chase came on the air in 1959. It was there from 59. It was there throughout the 60s. It was there throughout the 70s and went into the 80s. That is like 3 segments of generations that shared this memory together. And I think that's really what the creativity of it was. But it was also interesting because I lay out the book, and basically the film it's a story of the 3 legs of the stool that made Wrestling at the Chase. First of all, you had to have a location. But what's interesting about that location is Sam Coppler, when he was this architect, developer, and all that, not only did he lead to build the Chase Park Plaza and the complex, he didn't build the Chase itself, he built the Park Plaza, then he bought the Chase next door and expanded that, adding the Coruscant Room in 1957. But throughout St. Louis, and especially around Forest Park, he wanted it to look like Central Park. And all these buildings down there, I mean, there are so many buildings in that area, from the different Congress, the Senate apartment condoplex,
Right.
To the Powell Hall that we know today. The St. Louis Theater, which was the original name of Powell Hall, he designed that for vaudeville. And what it's turned into, motion pictures, and then the St. Louis Symphony. But all these things around there, he was a part. So there's this story of how we get to the Coruscant Room in the Chase Park Plaza, and even defining its greatness as one of the top hotel nightclubs in America. People forget the Chase Club, which was right next, it's where the cinemas are in the Chase today. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis Jr., Rosemary Clooney, who's who of entertainment would perform in the Chase Club. But that wasn't the hottest ticket in town. The hottest ticket in the town was like 75 steps to the east in the Coruscant Room. That's to get the ticket to come to Wrestling at the Chase. But it's also the story of how television came to St. Louisans. Because people today don't really quite understand it, that when Wrestling at the Chase came on in 59, KPLR TV had just come on the air. And it would be the 4th station. For all those previous decade of television's evolution, it was just 3 channels.
Right.
And you tell people about, hey, yeah, I heard the Star Spangled Banner and I saw the Indian on the TV. The Indian was the test pattern.
Right.
And some stations went off the air at 10:30, some would go off midnight, and they'd pop back up about 5 in the morning. It was not 100 channels going 24/7.
No.
And then you bring in Sam Muchnick and his stable of wrestlers. It's just a great story.
Well, and the story, and we've talked about it many times, Sam and Mr. Coppler making that connection, that marriage, is Ed so
on an airplane.
So on an airplane, on a handshake, and said, Mr. Coppler, you've got the location, I've got the locker room with some of the greatest, Johnny Valentines, Lou Thez, Pat O'Connor's, Whipper Billy Watson, and just the list goes on. And that's where that marriage took place at. And of course, being able to continue to tell that story for generations after generations, it's amazing. Like Ed says, we're out somewhere, and the younger generation that comes up that has researched Wrestling at the Chase or just wrestling in general in St. Louis, and then they run across either this book or the book that Larry Matisek wrote 20 plus years ago on Wrestling at the Chase. Great book also. It's different though than what this is. This is like I said, if you're looking for something that with full of stories and pictures, this is the book you need to get off the shelves, because you're gonna get a good history lesson of what wrestling meant in St. Louis. We're gonna take a break real quick, and we come back. I want to talk about the other project that he mentioned just briefly about the film that he did, Head Over Heels. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
Wrestling fans, one of SICW's newest sponsors for FanFest 2 is KC Insurance. For all your insurance needs, look to KC Insurance. Wrestling fans, you looking for the best in daily lunch specials and great menu food items? Look no further than Layla's Roadhouse, 440 Falling Springs Road in Cahokia Heights, Illinois. That's right, a family sit-down dining and always great specials. Also has the best pizza in the area.
Ed, we've talked about the book, how great it is, and I remember through the whole process of that, we spent hours and hours on the phone or in person, and you were picking out this picture, and you had to have the right ones. But I remember the one day you said, Herb, I'm not so sure I can't do a film on this.
Yeah.
And so kind of tell our viewers on how that brainchild all came about after that.
Well, I mean, there was this groundswell of memories. Right before the break, you talked about this book. It's a coffee table book. I can't tell you how many people, they buy it. They put it on their coffee table. Friends come over, and they start picking up and pushing the memories. And it was like, this is something bigger of a story than just a book. And I had made several other movies, films for PBS Network, 9 PBS here. And then these have gone to other regions of the United States. And, this love of wrestling was so tremendous. It was interesting. We were actually working on a different film from one of my books. We'd actually had film in the can, as they say. We'd been out interviewing and filming and, crafting the story based on this other book I had written. And once the PBS network found out this book came out and was watching, hey, we want this book, we want to leapfrog, and let's hold the cutting and shooting of that movie, and let's come back to this one and get it out there. And it's been great. Like my other films, it too was nominated for an Emmy Award. It's such an honor, but it was nominated because it's such a great story. It's a great story of human interest. It's a great story about bringing the feelings, the memories, these relationships, as we spoke, of viewers with their grandmothers. Like I said earlier, everybody has a grandmother story, but it's also the memories. And we got some of these in the film where you and your brother are watching it, and how many lamps or coffee tables got broke because they were reenacting Dick the Bruiser and
or how many times your brother put the figure 4 grapevine on you or the elbow.
The guy's mom was so proud. She had just wallpapered their living room. And sometimes we call them front rooms because in those days houses didn't have living rooms and family rooms. They had a front room, and it was wallpapered. And boom, the one guy goes right through the brand new wall, ruined all the wallpaper. But it's little instances like that when I mentioned front room. It's those memories. It was a different time. We even get into the different types of televisions and things. And it's the thing we talk about with the television aspect, where the movie, because where we premiered, it was like Channel 11 KPLR became the #1 independent television station in America on the strength of Wrestling at the Chase, and get a load of this one, the Three Stooges. Everybody can remember rushing home from school, if you were that generation, and watching the Three Stooges on Channel 11. And those two things prompted the audience watching, and that they became the #1. And it really is due to Wrestling at the Chase and the stories. And it was just a part of the fabric. And it was not just at the Chase Park Plaza. Every month Sam held these matches in sold out Kiel Auditorium, and we've got pictures in there. I mean, you can't find an empty seat in Kiel Auditorium. No. It was actually, to put it in perspective for today's audiences, during this period of the 50s and early 60s, wrestling was on a lot of stations. This was the premiere. Wrestling revenue on television outdid baseball, football, and basketball revenues combined.
Yeah.
It was the most. I mean, taverns would have it just for their customers. They'd be up there watching it. And you think about, how this evolved, and the story's right here. But you get into, you go through, as I said, really 3 generations of wrestler favorites. You had the early ones that you mentioned with Luthez and all those, and then you get into Dick the Bruiser and Cowboy Bob Ellis and all that gang of guys, and then you come into what became today's generation of wrestlers. And it's an interesting story, and I think it's a pretty doggone good claim that the WWE that we know today, it came about through this. Sam Muchnick retired in 1983. Vince McMahon's dad had been a long-time protege of Sam's, running territories up in the Northeast. And it was Vince who came along at the same time Sam was retiring, and cable TV was evolving. Pay-per-view was evolving, which changed everything in our culture.
Right.
Whether it's sensationalism or just bringing it 24/7, as we spoke. But that would not have happened had this really enlightened a nation. And that's a great.
Well, and I think you really point that out just by on the cover, those two individuals right there.
King Kong Brody.
King Kong Brody and Dick the Bruiser. And what I want to do right now, since we're talking about that, that's a good way to segue into this. We're talking about the Wrestling at the Chase book, but those two icons right there on the front of this book, Dick the Bruiser and Bruiser Brody. Some places he was known as King Kong Brody. I want to show you just a little clip of Bruiser Brody in action against Kamala, the Ugandan giant. Take a look at this, and we'll be right back with a lot more with my guest today, Mr. Ed Wheatley.
This event is one fall with television time remaining. Introducing from Santa Fe, New Mexico, weighing 301 pounds, King Kong Bruiser Brody. His opponent from Uganda, weighing 426 pounds, the Ugandan giant Kamala, accompanied by his boy Friday.
This is it. This is the match everybody's been waiting for. The return of Bruiser Brody against Kamala, the Ugandan giant.
And now Brody wants to come out after.
Bruiser Brody suffered more abuse than I've ever seen him take the last time these two met in the ring. And this time, I think somewhere in the subconscious mind of Kamala, he knows that Brody's going to be ready and waiting for him.
Look at him, like a caged lion. Bruiser Brody.
Let's stay with this match, by the way, as long as we can in the closing moments of TV wrestling. We'll try to bring you all the action here. Kamala against Brody live on All-Star Wrestling.
And here we go.
Both men starting off right away. Kamala, a chop to the forehead, and Brody's right there. Both men showing how neither man's backing up an inch.
Look at him. Look at Brody. A two-hander to the top of the head.
And Brody's going. He's biting his head now. Somewhere I know Bruiser Brody's thinking about caught with one of those judo chops of Kamala that floored King Kong Bruiser Brody. I've never seen anybody floor him with one punch before.
Right now, Bruiser Brody. And I think Kamala just bit the forehead of Brody.
Kamala slapping that belly. The 400-pound giant from the jungles of Uganda now. An open choke on King Kong Bruiser Brody.
Nothing fancy here. And now Kamala working on Brody. Two big, strong, physical men.
And Bruiser Brody, a thrust to the throat of Kamala. and Kamala the Giant is down.
This is what the folks paid to see. And they are getting their money's worth.
Brody slamming those size 14 boots into the head of Kamala the Giant. And Kamala has got a lot to pay for from the last time these two climbed in the ring.
Now Brody just clawing at the eyes, the nose of Kamala.
Neither man has applied a wrestling hold as yet. Brody raking across the eyes of Kamala, gouging away as Jimmy McGuire tries in vain to get the men to break on the ropes.
And here comes Brody off the ropes, and again, that size 14 boot to the head of Kamala. Brody goes again, this time takes a chop to the throat.
Kamala the Ugandan Giant almost impervious to pain. I've only seen several men that have the capacity to knock him down with one punch. One of those men is against him right now in Bruiser Brody.
And that time Brody took a thrust to the throat. Kamala.
You're seeing two of the giants in the sport of wrestling in the ring right now. This match would headline any card, anywhere, anytime. You go, bro, look at that drop kick.
And now Friday working on King Kong Bruiser Brody.
Wait a minute. And Brody's after Friday.
And he's got him.
Friday tried to interfere in the match. Brody's got him by the back of the collar. And it looks like
Brody's going to have his way with Friday.
Friday trying to make the safety of the ring, but the ring's the last place I'd want to be against Bruiser Brody.
Talk about a mismatch. Friday and Brody.
Brody's tearing at the claw. Oh, caught from behind by Kamala the Ugandan Giant. Brody didn't even see it coming. Friday falling outside of the ring, and Kamala's right on Bruiser Brody.
What a turn of events. This crowd still on its feet.
And Kamala the Ugandan Giant now regaining his feet. Again, slamming away
And
with
look at
those
a cut.
judo
A cut
chops.
opening up on the forehead of Bruiser Brody.
He's opened up the eye, it looks like to me, of Bruiser Brody inside that ring with those judo chops.
Oh, and Brody just a mass of blood. We're going to stay with it as long as we can.
Don't forget, next week here on All-Star Wrestling, you'll see King Cobra, Ted DiBiase, Buddy Landell, and a host of stars here on All-Star Wrestling.
Going for the pin. Will he get it? The count is 2.
Almost at the last second, Bruiser Brody managed to kick out. Now both men on their feet. Brody bleeding over his left eye. And again, a double chop to the top of the chest of Kamala the Giant. Brody's outside. He's going for the top rope, Kevin.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it. As Brody comes down off that rope. See you next week. Thanks for joining us on All-Star Wrestling. Look out.
Edge right there, you saw Bruiser Brody, Kamala the Ugandan Giant, who we had the fortune, good luck of having him at the only show produced at the Fox Theater that Larry and Sam and I did. It was great to be able to say that we were at the Fox Theater. Not too many people can say that, but I think that just goes to show that the reason why, and I know it was a hard decision of picking the front cover of this book.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know how many times you call and say, well, I'm leaning this way, I'm leaning that way, but I'm sure glad that those two men, because both of them I worked with over the years, and well deserving for both of them.
Well, I think, covers are important. It jumps at you. And boy, those two guys on that picture jump at you. There is a montage for those people that can't really make it out of other key wrestlers, in this blue, but we wanted it to be the jumping out because we just spoke earlier before that clip. It was wrestling at the Chase was generational, and everybody had their favorites. Some may have liked or not liked Dick the Bruiser. He was, if I look back at my time, he was, my favorite. And then another generation, when King Kong Brody came about, he was the leader of that generation. So, you got 3 generations. I picked these 2. We could have probably put Lou Thez on here as well, or Pat O'Connell. But we wanted these 2, and I mean, just that look at you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something there.
Like you said, that jumps right off the shelf
does.
at you, and I think that when I'm out and I talk wrestling, which is all the time, those two individuals' names always come up in any conversation, and we're fortunate to be able to keep that going here. But let's talk a little bit more about the Head Over Heels film, because some of our local talent, the Gary Jacksons, was a part of it. And you even interviewed one of our great fans, Jerry Bullion.
Yes.
Had a segment in
shortly
the film.
before he passed away.
Yeah, shortly before he passed away. He didn't get to see the finished product, but his family did. But it's just great. That film is out there, and it tells the history of wrestling at the Chase. So you've got the book, you've got this Head Over Heels program that you can you can watch. For those of you who have heard about the history of the wrestling in St. Louis, but maybe you just don't know a whole bunch about it, try to find the Head Over Heels on PBS Channel 9. Ed said they're going to be airing it again.
In the spring, late March, I believe it is the date.
You definitely want to see that, but the book covers a lot of it. You'll see a lot of the local guys from SICW in there that got to tell their story about how they used to go down to the Chase Park Plaza or to the studio, and now they're continuing that the history of wrestling here in the St. Louis region. But Ed, when you're out there putting that film together, I know there was times that you were pulling your hair out because I've said all along, Ed Wheatley is a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And I got to sit there and watch during some of the interviews with some of the people, Darla Staggs, when we brought her in for that, Barbara Goodish, and people like that you talked to. It was a nightmare, but I think the complete project that was done was very satisfying.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's got something they want to talk about. You'll film somebody for maybe 40 minutes, sometimes an hour, but they may be 40 seconds of sound bites into the film, and so to get them to elicit that special soundbite is what's so important that you're looking for. And in the same way, with Jerry Briscoe, we had him in there, and getting those great memories, and Bob Orton, and it's like you said, this book is just not all about wrestling at the Chase. We take it into not only the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame, and we also get into SICW and many of the recognize the people
Flash Flanagan,
who are continuing to perform at SICW that carry this tradition alive.
Right. In fact, this page right here in the book, and like I said, the big Texan, Waco, we got Marlon McDarby, the professional, Sean Sentel, Kowalski, Billy McNeil, Telecan, who are still out there today performing and doing what they grew up on in St. Louis, which was wrestling at the Chase. Curtis Wilde, Frankie D, Sean Vincent, the Canadian Hero. So, as Ed said, it's not just on the wrestling at the Chase, it's us carrying that legacy and those memories on, and I really was honored to be able to do that.
And those guys, and I think you too, those wrestlers you speak of, both men and women, because we got Christy in here, and they love signing this particular page of the book because for you and them, it's the transition and ties back to the original, the wrestling at the Chase, which is still here through your films and stuff.
Yeah, there's not one of the men and women in the locker room at SICW that parents or grandparents didn't have story after story, like you said. Every one of us had a story. Mine was my mother and I loved to stay up and watch it when it first came on Wednesday. I remember that was a big discussion we had at the beginning. Ed said, Herb, I can't find anything about it being on Wednesday. And finally, this guy, he won't leave a stone unturned because he wanted everything to be able to be documented. But I remember, and then we found it on that 1962 tape when Joe Garagiola was talking about each and every Wednesday night.
Yeah, and then we found some advertising. It kept leading you looking, because the thing is you don't want to put out, whether it's baseball, wrestling, a stat or a statement that then everybody's going to say, no, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Things like that. Well, here, turn to this page, and you'll see the advertisement from
It's right
KPLR, and it tells you Wednesday nights.
Yeah. So it's just things like that it's very well put together. So I really encourage you to get go pick this book up. I mean, you don't have to wait for a gift if it's somebody's birthday, but if it's just somebody you know that's a wrestling fan, surprise them and get them this book. It's still available at.
You can get it at any of the bookstores. You can get it on Amazon, online. Come to one of Herb's shows out here. We're there with the book.
Yeah.
And,
we're definitely going to have them, and we're going to talk about it here in a few moments later on in May at the big FanFest 2 that's going to be in St. Louis. Ed was there this past May, and
sold out.
In no time, the books were gone off the shelf. But we'll talk about that a little bit. But what I want to do right now is we're going to take another little break. Got to help our sponsors out. But when we come back, we're going to talk about why Wrestling at the Chase, which had it stayed on the air, we'd be celebrating their 65th year this coming May. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's back, May 17th and 18th. SICW FanFest 2. Tickets available at SICW.org. Meet the stars of professional wrestling. Up close and personal. Wendy Richter, Tito Santana, Steve Kern, the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart, Haku, Coco Beware, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr., Leilani Kai, Tim Storm, Sal Renaro, Brian Blair, Tommy Rich, Abdullah the Butcher, the Boogie Woogie Man, Manny Fernandez, Godfather, Rock and Roll Express, Jim Brunzell, Teddy Long, and Mac Davis, Bill Apter, and many more. Don't miss the SICW FanFest and St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame. It all starts with the Bill Apter one-man show on Friday and the FanFest and Hall of Fame on Saturday. Be there!
The vendors are lining up for FanFest 2 on Saturday, May 18th. We're happy to welcome the Nebraska Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame as one of our newest sponsors. Wrestling fans, there's nothing better than barbecue and wrestling. When you're hungry, stop by Mr. Barbecue with 2 locations to serve you in Columbia and Waterloo, Illinois. Great barbecue, cold beverages, and SICW wrestling.
It's 65 years ago this May. Wrestling at the Chase started in 1959.
Correct.
Joe Garagiola, the first play-by-play announcer, and look what happened to him, stardom.
People forget that Joe was the first commentator, and it was, if you read those clips, is the run-ins, because we have some of the film, and the advertising, it was Joe Garagiola and Wrestling at the Chase. He had actually top billing. Now, Joe had been around. He was doing Cardinal baseball. You know, he just grew up down the street. I mean, you talk about this Wrestling at the Chase when you're writing it, these moments of, I call them Harry Carey moments, where you go, holy cow.
Yeah.
You know, not only did Joe Garagiola live just a few miles down Kings Highway up on the hill, what happened right across from the Chase 5 decades earlier, when the Olympics, as part of the 1904 World Fair, happened in Forest Park, and that was the first time freestyle wrestling was allowed in the Olympics, and it became then the fad coming out of that Olympics. Before that was all the Greco-Roman, the pushing and grunting. I mean, you know, I loved it because going down to South Broadway back in the 19 teens and things, I pulled out some newspaper articles I included where people came, they were watching the match in the afternoon.
Yeah.
They left to go home and have dinner and came back, and they still
going on.
Going on. It was like, but this brought the action, this brought the excitement, and it all happened and started right here in St. Louis in 1904. I mean, so it's one thing after the other that
just
you're
tied it
gonna
all
go.
together.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting.
Well, and I remember when you would find articles like that, you would call me and say, man, you won't believe what I just found.
Yeah.
And it's just going to enhance the book that much more. And it sure did. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've taken it out of my shadow box that I keep it in and just say, hey, I want to refresh the good old memories. And I go to that. So,
Well, you know, I mean, there are pictures in here that really tell the sport. I mean, there's one where when Muchnick was first, it's his first event down at Kiel Auditorium. And
yeah, look at
you
that.
look at this picture here. That is Kiel Auditorium. Every seat, and they got every person looking at a camera where they took the photo. I mean, this is just tells you what this meant, not only to St. Louis, but to people across the country. And you know, it all really started with one man's genius, Sam Muchnick, how he not only put this together, but he held the NWA together, because before that it was these 32 territories, independent and across the country, and he brought this whole thing and ran it for almost 30 years.
Well, and you know, like you said, it was a Sam and a Harold Koppler. In fact, I'm happy to announce, and we've already did that basically, but we'll tell those who may be tuning in tonight for the first time that Harold Koppler is going to be inducted into the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame in May at FanFest 2, because, you know, this was a vision that him and Sam Muchnick had, and he probably should have been in there a long time ago. But he will be inducted in there because, you know, back then he was looking for content for his TV.
Yeah.
And Sam had that content. You know, you tell in the book about how the content, a lot of it he was using was Little League, Corey League.
Yeah, there was a time when Channel 11 first came, Koppler had bought a library of movies from Hollywood. And he thought, oh my God, I got this Hollywood movies. Well, it turned out they were all dogs and nobody liked them.
Yeah.
And, you know, they weren't watching his station. But there is articles, photos, even advertising how they showed Little League, Corey League baseball games just to fill the airwaves so they could get other things going. And once they started doing wrestling at the Chase and the Three Stooges, remember Captain 11, Showboat, you know, they would have. Then people started watching, and then they became attuned to the others. But it was this program
right there,
really
those four little words. While we're talking about that, let's take another little break, and while we do that, I want to show you some action from Wrestling at the Chase, some of the old classic matches that we try to show you each and every week. So take a look at this, and we'll be right back, and we're going to talk about this coming May, FanFest 2 coming up. You're going to want to hear that on some of the legends that we got coming in. We'll be right back.
The main event, a one fall with a 20-minute time limit. Introducing from Minneapolis, Minnesota, weighing 245 pounds, Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Flamboyant Ric Flair was on hand to tackle Tommy Sharp.
When they all agree that potential is there for this man, Nature Boy Ric Flair, now lifting Tommy Sharp for Ric Flair to be the world champion. There's the atomic knee drop to the tailbone of Tommy Sharp by Nature Boy Ric Flair. Can you imagine what Ric Flair would be like if he had that gold belt strapped around his waist? Can you imagine the conceit he would have then? Think of Buddy Rogers in his prime. Well, I'm sure that Ric Flair would surpass even that. Flair did a hard belt right underneath the eye, caught him along the cheekbone. See a little mouse there from where Tommy Sharp caught him with that punch. Oh, and Sharp walks right into it. But then he gouges the eyes, and hey, Tommy Sharp is hanging tough against Nature Boy Ric Flair. Sharp pounding on the Nature Boy. Ric Flair trapped in the corner by Tommy Sharp. Then a knee lift to the midsection. Flair pins Sharp to the ropes. Sharp fights back. Sharp and Flair toe-to-toe. Flair up hit the groggier of the two. Side headlock. Off the ropes comes Sharp. A flying tackle that floors Flair. Flair ducks. Oh, look out. Flair was waiting with that elbow and banged it home to the chin. Look at Flair strut now. He can take that punishment and still lash back with some of his own. Flair to the air, flying elbow drop. The flying elbow drop by Nature Boy Ric Flair. One more, says Nature Boy Flair. He hits that rope. A second flying elbow drop by Flair. He hooks the head, brings the arm over the top, and emulating the world champion and trying to do it a lot better than the champion if he can. Ric Flair drives Sharp down with the suplex. Sharp is a... Now, Punk, now you pay the price, says Ric Flair to Tommy Sharp. Flair brings that leg around. Sharp's out. He's practically unconscious now. He's out, and Flair still not satisfied. Clamps on the figure four leg lock, trying to damage the knees of Tommy Sharp. Sharp cries out as those ligaments and cartilages are stretched in the knee. The figure four leg lock by Ric Flair, refusing to release it, and finally under threat of disqualification, breaking the figure four leg lock. Nature Boy Rick.
Okay, fans, there you have it. Some classic action from Wrestling at the Chase. That voice of Larry Matysek, I'll tell you, I can close my eyes and just hear it. One of, if not the all-time great, in my opinion. I know each territory had their announcers, but here in St. Louis, he learned from so many of his idols, the Joe Garagiola, and so on and so forth. Johnny Curley, who was one of the first ring announcers. Later on, Mickey Garagiola, the brother to Joe, became a ring announcer and became Larry's sidekick, sitting there at ringside. So, I mean, it's just great to hear those voices and hear him call those actions, and that's why I like to play those, to bring back those memories, as Ed says, because it triggers those memories.
You know, it's funny about those memories. I had the fortune of having the bell from Channel 11, and when we do events, and I should have brought it here today, we ring it, and people, it's like Pavlov's dog, with the bell, then they start salivating for food. They hear that bell because it's got such a unique, and it's like they explode with memories and want to talk and want more. And it's just, that's what this is. That's what you're keeping alive. One thing I think it's good to kind of point to. You may not see it, so buy the book, as they say.
Yeah.
But this picture, it's one of my favorite pictures in the whole book. Everybody, as we said, loved Dick the Bruiser.
Right.
You want to know what kind of athletes these were, because I go into how many, and most of these men were former or even current football players in the NFL. Many of them were, or even up in Canada. Rocky Johnson, the Rock's dad, played up there in Canada. But this is Dick the Bruiser, who played for 3 years for the Green Bay Packers. And when you look at his picture in the middle of the team shot, who was the biggest, widest, most massive man on the Green Bay Packers? It was Dick the Bruiser.
Dick the Bruiser.
And people don't relate to these guys being these careers, these super athletes that they were. You just really, once you get into these stories, like you and I would say, these moments. Look at this picture of Dick the Bruiser. I couldn't wait to talk about that with you, because it was just amazing.
Yeah. Well, and that's why they announced him as the most dangerous wrestler around, and in St. Louis he was always, and to this day, if you walk down the streets of St. Louis or over here in Illinois, wherever you go, and you ask somebody, hey, who did your parents or grandparents like, or who did you like, I'm guaranteeing you they're going to say Dick the Bruiser, or they're going to say Bruiser Brody, or they're going to say Pat O'Connor. Those were household names, just like Wrestling at the Chase was.
One thing, just today's viewers, they may remember the last portion of Wrestling at the Chase when they moved into the studio, when they went to color television, because they would set up the ring, set up all the cameras, and then take them down so that the Corsan room can be used for all the social and business events there at the Chase. But then they moved into the studio because they wanted to go to color, and they had to leave the equipment. The initial color cameras were so delicate,
and expensive.
They were very, very expensive. But people don't remember the first when I was talking about the most wanted ticket in town was wrestling, not Frank Sinatra. The guy calls his wife, girlfriend, "Hey babe, I got tickets tonight to the Chase. Get dressed up." It wasn't to go see the golden throat of Frank Sinatra. It was to go see Wrestling at the Chase. And you'll see the films in the studio. You'll see films today where people are out wrestling today. When they came to the Coruscant room, the men were in tuxedos and suits. The women were in evening gowns,
pearl necklaces,
evening gloves, pearl necklaces. We show a lot of that in the book. and in the movie. But that's the scene in people's mind that these women are there hollering and screaming. They're getting a little a spit or sweat. That was a battle.
That was them.
Thing, you know.
Yeah.
And that's really where it is so different and such a memorable part.
I always loved the story. Our good late friend Mickey Gary Jolie used to tell basically what you just said. They'd call up their lady friends and say, "Come on, we're going to the Chase tonight," because the Chase was the place.
Chase was their motto.
And so, man, they'd get dressed up and they'd pull up at the Chase and they'd go walking in, and there'd be this smoke-filled room with the lights above the chandeliers and the wrestling ring there, and they'd say, "Wait a minute, we thought we were coming for a show," and they'd say, "We are." "Well, we thought we were going to dinner," and Mickey'd say, "Yeah, the hot dog vendor's over there in the corner." So, stories like that just trigger.
Well, the wrestlers had that same reaction, not just the audience, because they would come into this beautiful complex. They look up, and the chandeliers are still the same chandeliers in the Corsan room today. Like, where? Oh my God, are we in heaven? They're used to dark, dank VFW halls sometimes, convention centers. Nothing like this opulence of the Coruscant room.
Well, as you know, we went back.
Yes, we did.
We went to that was on our bucket list. Larry Matisick and I always wanted to go back and do a show at the Coruscant room, and we tried for many years, and we could never get anything done. And through Ed, we were able to get that done, and so I'm proud and honored to say that SICW here locally was the first promotion to go back and got to relive what it was like being underneath those chandeliers. The guys in the locker room, we're in awe. To the fact that it was just great.
We were able to work a special kind of private event there.
Yes.
It was sold out type event.
In fact, I thought what was so unique about that, the grandson of Harold Koppler, Bob Koppler, was the one who helped put that all together with us. And so, that kind of tied it all back together, made it all worth it.
We were with the Kopplers, and we were in the Chase, and to be standing up in a ring, with that backdrop, the stage in the back, and the chandeliers. That is one of those pictures, those moments that is never lost. And we're not speaking never lost. We're not finished. This story. And the events we're doing, we've been in the MAC how many
3 times?
Yeah. And there's some other big events coming, but probably the biggest is your FanFest, and that tradition keeps this all alive as well.
Well, and that's what I was going to talk to you, because I know you monitor everything that we post on social media, and this thing has grown bigger than it has from last year. Last year we had 50 legends. We're up to about 55 right now, and we're still 5 months out. So how important?
The moniker of the Chase is the place to be. This is the place now. St. Louis Wrestling, this FanFest you do.
Yeah, it's really. But in your mind, how important it is to bring together a group of these men that some of them was in this book that helped build that. How important is that, do you feel, to continue that legacy?
Well, I think all the sports have these kind of things. You go to the All-Star games or, of the different sports, and this is kind of like an All-Star game with the sports where the old-timers are there doing it. And not only is it good for the visual optic of, look at all these legends here at this event, it's also good for the wrestlers that it is like a social club, a community. The old wrestlers themselves, as they, relive the memories of their youth and tell their stories. But it's the optic of the fans coming here. This is what I heard about these guys. Cowboy Bob Orton. All these guys. They were, and the thing of it is, we. Just look at that. We talk about generational. Cowboy Bob Orton's dad, Bob Orton, wrestled on the very first episode of Wrestling at the Chase.
In 1959.
In 59, May 59. And then we had Cowboy Bob, those years. And then Randy, elevated himself as one of the top wrestlers in another generation.
Well, and then what we're talking about is SICW FanFest 2 takes place this year. A 2-night event if you want to come to the VIP event on Friday night. Our good friend Mr. Bill Apter, who does a tremendous one-man show. Been in the business as far as the magazines that we used to go and get off of the shelves at the corner drugstores. He was responsible for a lot of these guys' careers being made, because back in the day they didn't have the internet and didn't have a way to do it, so he would travel all over the world following these guys and taking their pictures and telling the stories, kind of like what Ed's done here. But you know, we've already, like I said, got about 55 legends booked for May 17th and 18th at the Aviator Hotel in South St. Louis at 6921 South Lindbergh Boulevard. Real easy to find right there at 55 in Lindbergh. But just listen to some of these names in case you haven't followed us on social media that's going to be there. Dr. D. David Schultz, the man that you could hear the slap that went around the world back in the day. B. Brian Blair, one of the killer bees, and I want to wish him a belated happy birthday this past weekend. Brian, CEO and president of the Cauliflower Alley Club. You've heard us talk about that many, many times now, but Brian will be there. The Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, one of the best tag teams ever back in the day. Dennis Condrey, the lover boy, is joining us. Stan the Lariat Hansen is returning there. Abdullah the Butcher, who had some of the greatest feuds ever with Bruiser Brody, will be there. Of course, Barbara Goodish is going to be there, the widow of Bruiser Brody, because keep in mind, this is the 65th anniversary of Wrestling at the Chase, but it's also the annual show that we do, the memory of Bruiser Brody there, so Barbara Goodish is always there. And over the last several years, when I lost Larry Matisek, we added his name, and then my good friend from South Broadway Athletic Club, Tony Costa, so it's the Bruiser Brody, Larry Matisek, and Tony Costa Memorial that we do every year. But also the Godfather, WWE legend, will be joining us. Sergeant Slaughter, you always got to have the Sarge there to help keep law and order when you're going to have a wrestling match. Steve Kern, and the list just keeps going and going. It keeps growing, and we're still 5 months away. This takes place May 17th for the VIP party. Saturday is the FanFest. Ed Wheatley will be there with the book. It opens up at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll run all day. 5 o'clock, we'll be doing the 2024 class of the Hall of Fame being inducted. We'll have that ceremony done in the ring, and then we do the wrestling featuring the Bruiser Brody Battle Royal. Last year we had 32 wrestlers in that Battle Royal. Won't be that big this year, I can assure you, because that was a logistical nightmare. But Ed, I really want to thank you for taking time to come out this evening, talk about the book, and I know there's things in the making, and they're going to be hearing a lot more about that. But I just really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come in and talk about it.
Well, appreciate it. Always here, always for Wrestling at the Chase. We got to keep that memory alive for the next generation.
We've got to do it. Fans, you've heard another great episode here where you join us each and every Sunday night at 8 p.m. right here. Mix it with some little history of the wrestling, little of the videos. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll be back here next Sunday night at 8 p.m. Everybody have a good weekend, or good week.